When we hear the name Karl Marx, we often think of class struggle, revolution, or communism. But at the heart of his philosophy lies a powerful framework, which is dialectic materialism. This concept not only shaped Marx's understanding of history and society, but also offers a lens to analyze political change across the world. In this video, we will explore the idea of dialectic materialism and discuss its application in understanding political change in Bangladesh. To begin with, let us understand the biography of Karl Marx. Marx's full name was Karl Heinrich Marx. He was born on May 5th, 1818, in the city of Trier in Prussia, present-day Germany. Marx came from a middle-class family. His father, Heinrich Marx, was a lawyer who converted from Judaism to Christianity, while his mother came from a prosperous Jewish family in the Netherlands. For his education, Marx first studied law and philosophy at the University of Bonn and later at the University of Berlin, where he was deeply influenced by German philosophy, especially the works of Hegel. In 1841, he earned his doctorate in philosophy from the University of Jena. Karl Marx went to produce some of the most influential works in history. His major writings include the Communist Manifesto, co-authored with Friedrich Engels, and Das Kapital, where he analyzed the workings of capitalism in details. Philosophically, Marx made groundbreaking contributions. He developed the theory of historical materialism, which explains how conditions and class struggles drive historical change. He offered a strong critique of capitalism, highlighting exploitation and inequality, and laid the foundations for ideas that continue to influence economics, political science, and sociology. Marx passed away in March 14, 1883, in London, England, where he spent his last decades of his life in political exile. Now let us move forward to dialectic materialism. The term itself consists of two parts, dialectic and materialism. To begin with, let us focus on the word dialectic. Dialectic is a popular concept in philosophy dating back to Socrates and Plato. In Plato's philosophy, dialectic referred to the art of refining arguments through continuous questioning and reasoning, what he called elenchus. The purpose was to strip away weak arguments, test assumptions, and reach a clearer form of truth. However, this classical dialectic is not the same as what Marx would later develop. Marx's dialectic, inspired by Hegel's philosophy, describes the dynamic process of change. It works through the interaction of theses, antitheses, and later synthesis. A thesis represents an existing condition, idea, or social order. An antithesis emerges as its direct contradiction or opposing force. The struggle between these two creates tension, and out of this conflict arises a synthesis, a new stage that resolves some of these contradictions. The synthesis then becomes a new thesis, which again produces its own contradiction, leading to another cycle. Now let us turn the second part of the concept, materialism. By materialism, we do not mean the pursuit of wealth or worldly possessions. Instead, it refers to a philosophical understanding, the belief that material reality exists independently of human thought. In other words, the way society is structured, its economic condition, class relation, and class struggles shapes human ideas, culture, and institution rather than the other way. For Marx, this was crucial. It meant that history and social change are not driven by abstract ideals or pure reason, but by the material conditions of life, how people produce, exchange, and survive. With this foundation, we can now understand dialectic materialism, the combination of the dialectic method of change and the materialist view of history. Together, we provide a framework to understand how society works and develops through contradictions rooted in material reality. In this video, we will now discuss the three core concepts of dialectic materialism: the unity and conflict of opposites, the law of the passage of quantitative change into qualitative change, the law of the negation.
Let's talk about the first principle of dialectic materialism. The first principle of dialectic materialism is called unity and conflict of opposites. It means that everything has two sides, and these sides are always connected. They cannot exist without each other. And For development to happen, its opposites also must exist. For example, a light cannot exist without darkness, and fairness cannot be understood without injustice. It is impossible to have one side of a contradiction without the other. It is through this struggle of opposites that real exchange happens and process occurs later. Now, let's talk about the cycle of unity and conflict of opposites. Every phenomenon contains contradictions or oppositions within itself. These oppositions or contradictions might change constantly due to struggle, and this struggle actually drives the change to actually occur in real life. It may happen externally or internally. So if there are no external contradiction existing, a new contradiction will happen within itself. That means a contradiction will start to happen from inside, and this way then will, after this contradiction, and a new cycle will happen, and this will go on and on. So let's try to see the unity and conflict of opposites in respect to Bangladesh. So there are many reasons. One of them are Bangladesh's quota system, education gap, or Bangladesh politics. To even understand before anything to about the quota system, we'll understand what happened in Bangladesh. Bangladesh was born in 1971. It was left with deep scars, and there were many families who were broken and struggled to rebuild. To create fairness, the government introduced a quota system. Its goal was to support freedom fighters, women, and marginalized groups at first. But the symbol, even though the quota system symbolized a justice and honoring the who has sacrificed the most, it became something different. Over the time, the quota system created new contradictions. Merited students who worked hard often saw themselves being left behind, and fairness that should be happened started to become discrimination and injustice. This contradiction fueled many protests, and finally a nationwide student protest uprising happened. Now let's try to pry into the education system that shows this phenomenon. That one of the reasons of this happening is gender gap. So gender gap was seen a lot after the war. For earlier decades, boys dominated schools or in higher education and society. They were often thought to be natural leaders in academics. But as more girls gained access to education, they began to excel, in many cases outperform boys. This started to create a contradiction because the old beliefs that boys were superior started to fall apart. Society had to adapt to this new reality, showing once more that the progress is driven by struggles of opposites. Now, let's go into Bangladesh politics and its connection to student uprising. The same principle can be seen appearing in politics. Army League once represented democracy, freedom, and people's voice, but over the time, contradictions grew within government, corruption happened, and lack of accountability grew stronger. These internal conflicts changed the very nature of the system, which began as a counter transformed into opposition authoritarianism. How this shows how the political order fall apart in its own and bring its own downfall. Now let's see what happened in student uprising and its connection. So all these contradictions came together in the recent student uprising. What started as a simple demand for fairness in the quota system exposed deeper problems, injustice and corruption. The authoritarian rule, the unity of fairness turned into conflict, and this conflict thousands of students came on the streets to protest according to Dialectical. This is how history moves, and we can say that contradiction within a system creates conflicts, and conflicts leads to transformation. And so contradictions are not weaknesses, they are engines of progress.
The second principle of dialectical materialism shows us the path of quantitative change into qualitative change. Every object has two properties. Take gold for example. Quantity means how much gold do we have, and if it changes, we simply have more or less of it. While quality means its purity. But if quality changes, the gold itself becomes something different, pure or impure, valuable or worthless. This principle means small gradual changes keep adding up, that is, quantitative change. However, once they reach a critical point, the system undergoes a qualitative transformation, which is a complete change. We can see this in our daily life. Take a balloon, you blow air into it slowly, that's quantity. But at one point, just a little more air makes it burst, a sudden qualitative change. Or think of a water on a stove. It heats degree by degree, but at 100 degrees Celsius, it suddenly boils into a new state. History and society also reflect this law. Years of pressure and suffering in France built up quietly, but 1789 they exploded into French Revolution. We experienced a similar pattern in Bangladesh during recent student uprising. In June 2024, the court reinstated old quota system that was given to freedom fighters' grandchildren. Students were unhappy, but the protests were still small. From June to July, because of government's inaction, demonstrations grew stronger, protests were rising, numbers were swelling, angers building. Until then, regime itself stood firm. Then came a spark. On live TV, the Prime Minister remarked, and I quote, কোটা কি মুক্তিযোদ্ধাদের নাতিপুতিরা পাবে না তাইলে রাজাকারদের নাতিপুতিরা পাবে? She tried to brand the protesters as Razakars and used the spirit of freedom fighters to put the protesters against freedom fighters. This insult ignited outrage across campuses and beyond. Only one slogan came from every campus, every hall. তুমি কে আমি কে রাজাকার রাজাকার কে বলেছে স্বৈরাচার স্বৈরাচার soon soon after Abu Said, a student protester, was killed by a police officer. His death became a turning point. The pressure in society reached its limits. At this stage, the demand itself changed. No longer just reform the quota, it became take down Hasina regime. The 9 point movement we earlier knew became only one. After this, events unfolded rapidly. First, the government tried to silence the people with a nationwide internet blackout. Everyone was under tight curfew. But instead of suppressing the protests, it pushed the anger even higher. Then came the July massacre, where more than 2,400 people were killed. This brutality only united people further. Soon, students, workers, and citizens from all walks of life joined in the long march to Dhaka. All this quantitative change finally triggered the true qualitative transformation of Bangladesh's political landscape. Sheikh Hasina, who had ruled as Prime Minister for 15 long years, fled to India. With her fall, the fascist regime came to an end.
Now we come to the last part of Marx's ideas, the law of the negation of negation. Sounds complicated, right? But really, it's simple. Marx believed that history doesn't just move in a straight line, it moves in cycles. One stage gets replaced by another, but the new stage keeps some things from the old one, changes them, and builds something new. That's how progress happens. Stage 1. Hasina regime. Let's see how this worked in Bangladesh, in the context of Bangladesh. Stage 1 was the long rule of Sheikh Hasina. Her government had centralized power, authoritarian control, and refused to reform the quota system. For years, this was the dominant order. What Marx would call this the thesis. People had to live with it, even though many felt it was unfair. Stage 2. Quota movement. Then came stage 2, the negation. Students rose up against this system. The quota movement wasn't only about jobs or opportunities. It was about rejecting injustice and saying no to authoritarian rule. This was a direct challenge to the government's legitimacy. The protests grew stronger, voices got louder, and the Hasina regime faced its biggest ever pushback. This was the first break, the first negation of the old order. Stage 3. Interim government. After the fall of Hasina's government, stage 3 arrived. This was what Marx called the negation of the negation. In other words, a stage that rejects both authoritarianism and chaos. An interim government was formed. It didn't erase everything from the past. It still used the old administrative system, but it also added something new: student leadership and civil society demands. This wasn't a simple return to the past. It was a transformation. The old mixed with the new, and together they tried to create stability. This is the real meaning of negation, building something new out of the clash of opposites. Stage 4. New government. And now we reach stage 4, the possibility of a new government. This new order will not be the same as Hasina's regime. That stage is gone for good. Instead, a new political system may rise, one that is more democratic, more inclusive, and more accountable. But even this new order won't be perfect. It will carry its own contradictions, and someday those contradictions might create another movement. And that's how history works. It never stops, it keeps moving forward, through struggle and change. So, in Bangladesh's 2024 movement, we can clearly see Marx's law of the negation of negation. First came Hasina's regime, then its overthrow, then the interim phase, and finally the start of a new order. History didn't repeat itself, it transformed, it advanced through contradictions, and with this, we finish our journey through Marx's philosophy, showing how his ideas still live in the struggles of today.